The training hall of the Galactic Academy rose like a metal cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows, its steel banners hanging like cold witnesses from 100 alien worlds, and every light in that vast chamber pointed toward the dark alloy block sitting at the center of the floor. Cadets from across the galaxy stood trembling in formation, their breath tight, their nerves stretched thin as one alien after another stepped forward, placed their hands on the impossible load, and felt the crushing truth of its weight. Muscles tore, armor cracked, claws scraped against the metal as the block refused to move. Not even a whisper, not even a shiver, and the silence that followed each failure felt heavier than the test itself, drifting through the hall like a quiet storm no one could outrun. From the far back of the formation, the human cadet watched with steady eyes, his hands clasped behind his back, listening to the low whispers slipping through the ranks, cruel and confident. Humanity is weak, Earth has no place here. While he stood as still as stone, the calm center of a rising storm none of them could see yet. He waded through the humiliation of world after world. He watched species born under crushing gravity sink to their knees. He watched champions gasp for air as instructors turned away with disappointment etched across their faces. And with every failure, something in the hall began to change. The bravado dimmed, the pride cracked, and the entire room slowly realized the truth they did not want to face. The galaxy's finest could not lift the weight even a single inch. At the very edge of the formation, the human finally exhaled once, slow and quiet, feeling the memory of broken cities and heavy burdens pulling at the edges of his mind. Memories of a world where children grew strong because they had no other choice. When the instructor's voice thundered across the room, calling his name as the final challenger, the hall grew unnaturally still, as if the air itself held its breath. Every cadet turned, expecting a joke, expecting a fragile outsider to fail like the rest. But the human stepped forward with a calm that cut through the room like a blade, his footsteps echoing deeply across the metal floor. He reached the edge of the platform, the impossible load rising before him like a silent monument to every insult thrown at Earth. And for a heartbeat, the entire Galactic Academy watched him in total, breathless silence. Then he placed one hand on the impossible weight, and the hall felt like it was holding its pulse, waiting for something it did not understand. And in that frozen moment, the galaxy had no idea what was about to happen next. The metal felt cold beneath his palm, colder than anything in the hall, colder than the whispers and the doubt pressing against his back. And for a long moment the human cadet did not move. He only breathed, slow and steady, as if measuring the heartbeat of the impossible weight itself. A faint hum vibrated through the block, a low growl of compressed alloy forged from a dead star, and around him the alien cadets leaned forward, their eyes wide, their fear and curiosity twisting together in a silence that wrapped itself around the room like a tightening rope. The instructors watched with tight jaws, expecting the same trembling strain they had seen from the others, expecting the same failure. But something in the air shifted, something small and sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks across a dark sky. The human tightened his grip just slightly, his fingers sinking against the worn metal edge, and memories rose unbidden, the heavy weight of broken steel beams he had carried through ruined streets back on Earth, the long nights spent lifting rubble with numb arms just to pull one more survivor from the wreckage, never stopping, never resting, because his world had taught him that if he didn't lift, no one would. Those memories flickered through him like sparks, lighting something deep and hidden inside. Not anger, not pride, but a quiet power born from every burden Earth had ever placed on his shoulders. The hall waited for him to strain, to groan, to tremble like the others. But he stood perfectly still, the kind of stillness that felt dangerous, the kind that made even the Galactic Council observers lean in without realizing they had moved. A soft breath slipped from his lungs, a breath almost too quiet to hear, and then his arm tensed, not violently, not desperately, but with slow certainty, as if he already knew something the galaxy did not. The impossible load vibrated, just a tremor, so slight most cadets thought they imagined it, but the instructors saw the movement, their eyes widening with a flicker of disbelief that cracked through their rigid discipline. The cameras zoomed in, focusing on the human's hand, and a ripple spread through the crowd, fear mixing with awe, because no one understood how something forged to defeat them all could shift under one human palm. Then, in the quiet that followed, the weight lifted a fraction of an inch, a breath's width, but enough to break the sound barrier of expectation, enough to send shockwaves of silence across the hall. And just as the instructor stepped forward, stunned, the human's expression changed, not with a smile, but with something deeper, something almost like pain, as if he felt another weight, one no one else could see, pressing hard against his heart. Before they could speak, before the hall could react, the block shuddered again, harder this time, as if something inside it had awakened. The floor vibrated beneath their boots as the block gave another sharp jolt, a deep metallic tremor that rolled through the hall like the first rumble of an earthquake, and every cadet froze as if the air had suddenly thickened around them. The instructors exchanged alarmed glances, their training telling them this was wrong, that the impossible load was not designed to respond to pressure, not designed to react to any living hand, yet something inside the alloy pulsed like a dormant heart waking from a long sleep. The human felt a vibration push up through his arm, a strange warmth rising beneath his skin, not painful, but unsettling, as if the metal wasn't just heavy, it was aware. A quiet shiver passed through him, the memory of old stories from Earth whispering at the back of his mind, stories of machines that remembered their makers long after the world had forgotten them. Around him, alien cadets stepped back in fear, their voices dropping to frantic murmurs, wondering if the block had been sabotaged, wondering if the human had triggered something forbidden, something ancient, something that should have stayed buried in silence. The instructors barked at them to hold their positions, but even their voices wavered as the glow beneath the alloy surface brightened, faint lines spreading like cracks of light across the metal, tracing patterns no one recognized. The human didn't move, didn't let go, because something deeper pulled him forward, a feeling stronger than fear, a feeling that the block was reacting not to strength, but to him specifically, as if it had been waiting for a touch that matched something hidden in its core. The hall darkened as the lights flickered, the faint hum rising into a steady pulse, and every camera drone turned sharply toward the human, sensors locking on him with urgent beeps, transmitting data straight to the Galactic Council observers who were now standing instead of sitting. A cold realization settled into the room, spreading faster than any rumor ever could. The weight wasn't simply lifting, it was responding. The human's fingers tightened, his heartbeat sinking with a slow, rising thrum beneath the alloy, and for a moment he felt a presence, something vast and distant, something older than any world represented in the banners above. Then the block jumped, lifting fully off the ground for a single impossible second, glowing white-hot across its edges, and the hall erupted in shouts of fear and awe. The human staggered back, breath shaking, the glow reflecting in his eyes as every cadet stared at him in pure disbelief. And before the instructors could even form a command, a deep metallic voice echoed from the block itself, a voice none of them had ever heard, speaking a language older than the Galactic Council. It whispered one word: human. The word hung in the air like a blade made of sound, sharp enough to cut through every voice, every breath, every assumption the galaxy had ever held, and for a long second no one in the hall moved. The glowing block drifted back to the floor with a heavy metallic thud, the light dimming but not dying, faint lines still pulsing across its surface like veins beneath ancient skin, and every cadet felt the chill of something far older than their academy settle around them. The human stood frozen, his chest tight, his breath caught halfway between fear and recognition, because the voice hadn't spoken in threat or anger, it had spoken in certainty, as if naming something it already knew by heart. The instructors tried to regain control, shouting orders that barely held steady, but their voices bounced weakly off the steel walls, drowned out by the quiet hum now rising from the block like a living heartbeat. The human took one step back, his hand trembling, not from the weight he had lifted, but from the weight of that single word, the way it echoed in his mind like he had heard it before, not with his ears, but somewhere deeper, somewhere tied to memories he didn't understand. Around him, alien cadets recoiled, their eyes wide with fear, some stepping behind their own classmates as if the human had suddenly become something dangerous, something unpredictable, something their homeworlds had never warned them about. The Galactic Council observers whispered urgently into their comms, their gaze locked on the human as if he had just broken a law written in the bones of the universe, their fear quiet but unmistakable. The block pulsed again, softer this time, almost gentle, and the human felt something warm push against his thoughts, like a question pressing from the inside of the metal. But he didn't know how to answer, he didn't even know how to breathe under its presence. His heart pounded hard against his ribcage, each beat louder than the last, and for a moment he wondered if he should step forward again, place his hand back on the metal, let it speak, let it finish whatever it had awakened for. But another feeling rose in him, an instinct older than training, older than courage, something from Earth itself, a warning that whatever this was, whatever recognized him, whatever waited inside that impossible alloy, it was tied to a past the galaxy had buried for a reason. A deep alarm suddenly blared through the hall, red lights flashing across metal walls, drowning the room in crimson as the Academy's security systems locked into emergency mode. Cadets dropped to their knees, instructors raised their weapons in pure panic, and the observers shouted for containment units. Because in the center of the hall, the glowing block cracked open, just a hairline fracture, and a thin line of white light spilled out, reaching toward the human like a ghost rising from a forgotten war. And he felt it call to him again. The fracture widened with a slow, agonizing grind, a thin beam of white light slicing through the dim red glow of the alarms, and every cadet felt the air tighten as if the hall itself was holding its breath. Instructors shouted for the human to step back, weapons raised with shaking hands. But they didn't fire, not because they were calm, but because none of them understood what they were aiming at anymore. The block's light reached outward in a trembling arc, brushing across the floor, crawling up the human's boots, and in that moment he felt a pull deep in his chest, not physical, but emotional, a pull filled with longing, recognition, and a sorrow so old it felt carved from the bones of the universe. He tried to back away, but his legs refused to move, his heartbeat matching the pulse of the light until it felt like they were breathing together. The line of radiance climbed higher, wrapping around his ankles like warm mist, and the alien cadets shrank back in pure terror, some stumbling over armor plates, some whispering prayers in languages that had never touched human ears. The Galactic Council observers shouted commands through trembling voices, ordering containment drones, ordering the hall sealed, ordering the human isolated, as if doing so could stop whatever ancient thing had just awakened inside the alloy. But the human couldn't look away, because the light carried more than energy, it carried images. Flashes in his mind like memories stolen from another lifetime, glimpses of towering machines, burning skies, and figures in armor that looked almost human, standing against a darkness so vast it swallowed stars. His breath hitched, his fingers curling involuntarily, as if reaching for something he had never learned to name. The block responded instantly, the light tightening and rising in a sudden surge, swirling around him like a growing storm, lifting dust and debris in a spiraling circle that sent cadets scrambling for cover. Instructors yelled for emergency shields, but the machines malfunctioned the moment they powered on, sparks bursting from their emitters, as if the block's energy rejected every piece of technology in the hall that didn't belong to it. Then the fracture split open fully with a deep metallic roar, a sound that vibrated through bones and blood, and the block unfolded like a blooming star, revealing an inner core covered in symbols that ignited as soon as the human's eyes touched them. The light shot upward in a pillar that pierced the ceiling and shook the entire academy, alarms dying, lights flickering, gravity wavering for a heartbeat as if the hall were falling through space. And through the blinding radiance, a shape began to rise from the core, a silhouette tall, armored, unmistakably humanoid, reaching out a hand toward him as if it had been waiting centuries for this moment. The hall collapsed into terrified screams just as the figure spoke a second word, echoing through every mind present. Awaken! The armored figure rose from the core in a slow, weightless ascent, its body forged from the same ancient alloy, every plate glowing with soft white light, every symbol carved into its surface pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. The cadets could only stare, frozen between awe and terror, as the figure stepped forward with impossible grace, the air bending around it as if reality itself recognized its presence. Its face was a smooth metal helm, but the light inside flickered like eyes, watching the human cadet with a familiarity that made his chest tighten and his knees tremble. He didn't understand how or why, but he felt it. This thing knew him, knew humanity, knew something buried so deep in Earth's past that history had forgotten to write it down. The figure stopped only inches from him, the white glow brushing across his skin like warm breath, and when it spoke again, its voice carried not just sound but memory, echoing with the weight of 1,000 battles. You carry the strength of the first makers, it said, every word trembling through the metal beneath their feet, the strength that shaped me, and the strength the galaxy feared. The human swallowed hard, emotion rising like a tide he could barely hold back, because for the first time he understood, this wasn't just a test, this wasn't an accident, this was a calling written long before the Galactic Council had ever named him weak. Behind him, instructors shouted warnings, cadets crawled for cover, and drones sparked out one by one, shutting down in the figure's presence. But the human didn't move, didn't look away. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something he had never felt before. Purpose. The armored being extended its hand toward him again, palm open, light spilling across the floor like a sunrise, and for a heartbeat the entire hall fell silent, watching a moment that felt older than the stars themselves. When his fingers touched the metal, a wave of warmth surged up his arm, racing through his veins, igniting every memory of struggle, loss, rebuilding, every burden Earth had forced him to carry. The room vanished in a rush of white light, and all he saw were faces, human faces, from ages long gone, warriors, builders, survivors, each one passing that strength forward, each one whispering the same truth he had never been told. The light dimmed slowly, returning the hall to view, revealing the armored figure now bowed before him on one knee, its voice soft, almost reverent. Humanity does not rise because it is strong, it said, head lowered. Humanity rises because it refuses to fall. Tears burned behind his eyes, the weight in his heart transforming into something fierce and steady, a quiet fire that felt like destiny settling into place. The cadets stared in stunned silence, The instructors unable to speak, the Galactic Council's fear crackling across their comms as the truth unfolded right before them. And as the human stood there, bathed in the fading glow, he realized that the galaxy hadn't underestimated Earth. It had forgotten the legend humanity was always meant to be. The hall remained frozen, every cadet and instructor caught between fear and disbelief as the armored figure stayed kneeling before the human, its glowing head bowed like a living monument honoring a truth the galaxy had spent millennia burying. Slowly, it rose back to its full height, towering over the human with a presence that felt less like a machine and more like a guardian returning to a duty it had never abandoned. The light inside its armor pulsed brighter, casting long shadows across the floor, and with each pulse the air thickened, vibrating with energy that made the banners on the walls flutter as if a wind from another age had swept through the hall. The human steadied his breath, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and dread, because the warmth flowing through him didn't fade. It grew stronger, pulling at something deep inside his mind, tugging at memories that weren't entirely his. The armored figure turned its helm toward the Galactic Council observers, its voice echoing with a cold, ancient authority that silenced even the alarms. "You hid the truth," it said, and the walls trembled with the weight of its accusation. "You buried the first Maker's legacy under fear." The counselors froze, their hands shaking, knowing every camera was still recording, knowing this revelation was spreading through the Academy network, through every screen, every drone, every watcher across the galaxy. Rumors would erupt like wildfire. Worlds would panic. Empires would question everything they believed. The human's breath hitched as the figure slowly turned back to him, the light in its chest glowing brighter with every step closer. "You feel it," the figure whispered, and its tone softened into something almost gentle. "The memories you cannot understand, the strength that does not come from muscle, but from inheritance." The human swallowed hard, tears threatening behind his eyes as images flashed again. Towers of metal rising into burning skies, human-like silhouettes standing side by side with beings of light, and a colossal war tearing galaxies apart. He stumbled, gripping the figure's arm for balance, overwhelmed by visions he had never lived, yet somehow remembered. The cadet stared in silent horror, realizing he wasn't just lifting an object. He was touching a history the galaxy had locked away. The figure reached toward its own chest, pressing a hand against the glowing core, and with a soft metallic hiss, a compartment opened, revealing a small crystalline shard pulsing like a living star. It held the shard out to him with both hands, reverent, almost trembling. "This belongs to your kind," it said, "the final key the galaxy feared you would reclaim." The human stared at the shard, its light reflecting in his wide, shaking eyes, because carved into the crystal, clear as fire, was a symbol no alien had ever seen, but every human child on Earth knew by heart. It was the emblem of humanity, etched long before history ever recorded it. The shard's light shimmered across the hall like a quiet sunrise, soft yet unsettling, a glow that felt warm on the skin but heavy on the heart, and every cadet sensed something shifting, something that couldn't be undone. The human stared at the symbol carved into its core, the familiar lines and curves he had seen on Earth's old flags, old textbooks, old monuments, yet here it felt different. Older, deeper, carved by hands that might have lived before humanity ever walked on soil. His fingers trembled as he reached toward it, not from fear alone, but from the unbearable weight of recognition, like standing face to face with a truth he had been born to carry without ever knowing it. Around him, the others held perfectly still, unable to decide whether they were witnessing salvation or the first spark of a storm that would swallow them all. The armored figure lowered its head slightly, its voice softer now, almost mournful, as if remembering things the universe had tried to forget. "Your ancestors were not the galaxy's children," it said, its tone echoing through the hall like a distant drumbeat of fate. "They were its architects, its defenders, its final shield in a war that erased whole civilizations." The human's breath caught in his throat, the shard hovering inches from his hand as the figure continued, every word peeling back the darkness layer by layer. "When the great enemy returned, your people sealed their power, scattered their creations, and chose to fall silent so the galaxy could rebuild without fear." A hush swept across the hall, deeper than silence, the kind that made even the strongest hearts falter. The alien cadets looked at the human with wide, uncertain eyes, struggling to understand how the weak species from the blue world could be tied to something so ancient, so powerful, so terrifying. The instructors stood rigid, staring at the shard with a fear they didn't bother to hide anymore, because they could feel it too. The air was changing, vibrating with a quiet pulse that grew stronger with every heartbeat. The human finally wrapped his fingers around the shard, and a soft warmth flowed through him, gentle at first, then rising in waves, carrying whispers of voices he had never heard yet somehow recognized. Memories stirred again, ruined citadels, blazing skies, metal giants fighting in shadows, and a promise spoken through the ages. When the enemy returns, so shall humanity's light. The armored figure stepped back, its glowing eyes dimming as if preparing for what came next. The awakening has begun, it said, its voice trembling like metal under strain, and the enemy who once broke the stars has felt it. The hall trembled. The lights flickered. Far above, something vast stirred in the silence of space. And in that fragile moment, shard in hand, breath unsteady, destiny settling across his shoulders, the human understood the truth. The storm that wiped out humanity's first age was coming back. And this time, it knew exactly where to look. The shard pulsed harder in his hand, its light brightening until it painted the entire hall in white fire, and every cadet felt the air thicken with a pressure so heavy it pressed against their lungs. Above them, the academy's ceiling groaned as alarms shrieked, red light spiraling across metal walls while distant thunder rolled through the structure. Not from weather, but from something massive moving in orbit. The armored figure lifted its head sharply, its glowing eyes narrowing as if listening to a sound only it could hear, and when it spoke, its voice trembled with urgency and dread. "They have found us." Those words fell like stones, heavy enough to fracture hope itself, and the hall erupted into frantic motion. The cadets scattered, instructors shouting orders drowned in chaos, but the human remained rooted in place, the shard's warmth racing through his veins, filling him with courage that clashed with terror. The armored guardian stepped toward him, its metal plates glowing hotter, humming like a war engine waking from centuries of sleep. "You must leave this place," it said, placing a hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Your blood calls to them, and they will not stop until everything around you burns." The human's breath shook, but he didn't step back, didn't hide, because the visions burning behind his eyes made it clear that running wouldn't save anyone, not the Academy, not the galaxy, not even Earth. A thunderous crack split the ceiling, shards of metal raining down as the sky above the hall tore open in a violent burst of darkness and light. A colossal shape descended through the breach, a shadowed warship larger than any Galactic Council vessel, its hull covered in jagged black armor that swallowed light like a living void. Screams filled the chamber as the enemy ship unleashed waves of energy that shattered support beams and sent shockwaves rolling across the floor. The human staggered, gripping the shard tighter, feeling it beat against his palm in perfect rhythm with the invading force, as if the shard knew this enemy, as if it had waited for this moment too. The guardian stepped in front of him, raising its glowing arm, projecting a barrier of light that held back the first wave of destruction, the impact shaking the hall like an earthquake. "You were born for this battle," it said, its voice strained, its armor cracking under the pressure. "And you must choose now, run from your destiny, or become the flame your ancestors left behind." The human lifted his eyes toward the enemy warship, its shadow swallowing the Academy, its weapons charging for a killing strike. The shard surged with blinding light, filling his chest with fire. And as the Guardian's barrier shattered in a thunderous explosion, the human screamed from the depths of his soul. And the shard answered. The shard erupted like a newborn star, its light exploding outward in a roaring wave that drowned the hall in a brilliance so fierce it carved the shadows into fleeing streaks. For a heartbeat, time froze. Dust hung in midair, the enemy warship's weapons paused mid-charge, the terrified cadets silenced by the breathless stillness that swept across the shattered academy. The human stood at the center of it all, his body outlined in white fire, his face lit with a mixture of fear, pain, and a destiny he had never asked for, yet somehow felt carved into his bones. The shard floated above his palm now, spinning slowly, its light wrapping around him like the embrace of 1,000 forgotten ancestors returning home. Then the light surged again, this time with purpose. It raced upward, slamming into the underside of the enemy warship with a thunderous shock that split clouds and shook the very air. Lines of ancient symbols ignited across the ship's armor, burning through the black metal like molten rivers, turning the invader's hull into a canvas of searing white cracks. The alien vessel roared, engines screaming in a sound not meant for living ears, and for the first time in centuries, the enemy knew fear. Cadets shielded their eyes, instructors dropped to their knees, and even the armored guardian stepped back, bowing its head as the shard unleashed the full echo of humanity's first age. The human lifted his arm higher, not because he understood what he was doing, but because the fire inside him demanded it, guiding him with the certainty of a memory older than language. The shard answered with a final pulse, a brilliant burst that tore the warship's core apart in a single silent flash. The sky lit up like dawn breaking across a wounded world, and a rain of shattered metal fell harmlessly onto the Academy grounds, dissolving into dust before it touched the floor. When the light finally faded, the human collapsed to one knee, breath shaking, body trembling under the weight of what he had unleashed. Around him, silence spread, not the silence of fear or disbelief, but the silence of reverence, the silence of people witnessing the birth of something they had never imagined. The armored guardian approached, its voice soft, almost tender. "You did not destroy them," it said. "You reminded them." The human looked up, exhausted, eyes shining with tears he didn't bother to hide. "Reminded them of what?" The guardian knelt beside him, placing a hand over the shard now resting quietly in his palm. "That humanity," it whispered, "was never the galaxy's weakness. It was always its hope."